I'm very pleased now to introduce our presider for our second session, Professor Brent Seales of the Department of Computer Science at the University of Kentucky, whose persistent work on this project ever since 2005 or earlier has led to these extraordinary breakthroughs. We first met when he asked if he could come to the University of Michigan and try his technique for digital unwrapping on some of our materials, which we were able to provide, and the technique worked brilliantly. He told us that the back of a book binding that he had was going to be visible as different layers written in Hebrew, and then our conservator took the thing apart and proved that this worked. But of course that was written in iron-based ink, much easier to deal with than the ink from Herculaneum that we're looking at now. So please join me in welcoming Professor Brent Seales.
Thank you, Richard. It's my pleasure to be presiding over this session today, and it's packed with 4 very exciting speakers. We have a bit of a change from the schedule that you're holding. We're going to kick off the session with Mami Hayashida, who is technical staff at the University of Kentucky. Mami works on my research team in Lexington, Kentucky at the University of Kentucky, and she is a multi-talented woman who in her former life was a tenured piano professor at a university in central Kentucky. And so if we're lucky, after she regales us with her technical work here, she might play the piano. Mami, please come and give us your talk, Finding the Invisible Ink.
Thank you, Dr. Seales. Is the microphone okay for everyone? Okay. So I'm Mami Hayashida, and in this talk, I would like to talk about the role of machine learning in all of this. And more specifically, I would like to focus on what happened before the Scroll Prize took off. With the Scroll Prize, of course, one of the journalists said that an army of nerds from all over the world joined the effort. And I think, that's kind of how I look at it. But before that, in our small lab, just a handful of us, we were doing something, and that's, that story, hopefully exciting, is what I'm going to share. And I am going to try my best to explain the machine learning part in a way you can understand even you have no idea what that is. That is what I'm going to try. So, InkID, that is just the name of this framework, software we implemented, but it is for ink discovery. And why did we even need this? So we haven't heard much about the virtual unwrapping today yet, but you will later this afternoon. But you can imagine that that whole physical unwrapping that was just so damaging and that was just so brutal, that didn't work too well. And now with all the modern scanning technologies such as micro-CT and so on, that has completely changed the way we study fragile or damaged historical artifacts. And a beautiful example of this is the Engedi scroll. And in 2015, which was before I joined the group, but our group at the University of Kentucky succeeded in revealing its text by virtually unwrapping it. Now, you cannot really read it. Well, I can't read it, but you can see that the ink is bright. You can see the writing on this text. Now, that's great. So you think, okay, great. Now we know how to do this with everything. Well, not quite yet. So, but what if you take the trouble to unwrap something, flatten it, and see nothing, as in that picture? Well, unfortunately, this is a case with Herculaneum scrolls. Not only are these scorched and charred scrolls very difficult to virtually unwrap, even when it is carefully unwrapped, no text emerges. Now you may say, in this case, it's taken from that center of the scroll. Well, maybe you just got unlucky, and that section just contained no writing whatsoever from the beginning. So you may think that. Well, but we also know that's not the case, because here's a fragment where you can see that there is ink, and that's an infrared image. But again, on the right side, do you see anything? No. The ink just is not there to be seen. And here's yet another example. This is one of the fragments, Paris 2. And you can see that X-ray image has nothing on it. And why is that? It's because the ink that was used was primarily from fine soot, which is almost pure carbon. And of course, papyrus is plant-based, which means it's carbon. So when X-ray scans this artifact, then there is just no contrast, no difference. So what we get is a kind of blank page like this with no text. So that's not good. Then what do we do? Well, but it's got to be there. Something has to be there. If there is papyrus and there is ink on it, there is got to be something there. And there really is. So here is a highly magnified image of a papyrus with the lower half with ink on it. And can you see the difference? When it's magnified to this level, you can see it. You can see the difference in texture. The top part, blank papyrus, it's kind of bumpy, and the ink part is smooth, but with some cracks you can see, but clearly it's quite different. So you can imagine if the micro-CT can scan everything inside the scrolls, that is, even the hidden parts, at this resolution, we should easily be able to see something. And not because of the difference in composition, but rather because of the physical difference, morphological difference. Unfortunately, that is not the case. The X-ray image resolution we get is nothing like this. So therefore, we cannot see it. When we look at those things, when we examine them with our eyes, we cannot easily see the difference. But we all know computers can do some magic sometimes. And we hypothesized that even if we humans are unable to detect such a subtle difference, perhaps computers can do that. And that is the basis for machine learning. Okay, so this is really the core of my talk, and I'm going to try to explain how this works. So this is a classical case of supervised machine learning, where you have data, and you have something called training data. And training data means you have some kind of an input, and you also know what the outputs should be. So classical case, like textbook example of it, you have a whole bunch of pictures. It's a cat or a dog. And you already know which of those pictures are cats and which ones are dogs. So you have them labeled. That's what I mean when I say labeled. Then you put it through this machine learning pipeline, and you put in all these pictures, and you train this model by giving the model the answers already. So guess which one it is. Okay, you say cat. Well, it was a cat. You're right. You say cat. It was a dog, so you're wrong. And machine basically learns to distinguish the two. And that is the very basic concept of supervised machine learning. So here, though, we don't have cats and dogs. Instead, we have, let's say A, what's shown there in that square A is papyrus with a writing. So let's say, there is delta, or triangle, whatever you want to call it. And the input here is B. Features. What are features? Well, you can imagine this training data is the 3D data. So instead of pixels, it's got lots of voxels. And we grab a few of those and we create something called a subvolume. And what it is it's just a small chunk of that surface. And that is your input data. And we're not going to ask if it's dog or cat. Instead, we're going to ask, does that part contain ink? But of course, the model doesn't know how to distinguish the two unless you teach it to do so. So what can we do? Well, if we already have a papyrus example where we know where exactly the ink is, then we can also provide that answer. So what we do is we put in this input, B, features, and that F part is the machine learning part. Now, if you don't really know what that means, you can think of it as, do you remember when you took math in high school or college, those polynomial equations? So let's just pile up some of those. And so what you do is you put in these features, which are, of course, numerical values, do all kinds of complicated math, layer after layer after layer, and something comes out. And that, whatever comes out is either ink or no ink. Let's say 1 or 0. And in the beginning, that mathematical model is no better than you or me, us just guessing it, or just random coin toss. But what training does is the model itself gets revised. Not the input, not the output, but the mathematical equation. Remember that black box where we just threw in all the mathematical equations? That gets updated in such a way that given an input, we are much more and more likely to get the expected output. So in the beginning, maybe it's a 50-50 chance, but gradually it becomes maybe 58. Maybe later it becomes 75% accurate, and so on. That is the training part. Now, once we get to a point where the model is performing well enough, now is the time. This is the exciting moment where we get to see if it really works. And what do we do to examine if this model is useful at all? Then so far, we've hidden this prediction data, box E over there. That is similar kind of data, but it's different. So from here, we take those chunks again, and we feed it to that model, and say, now we're not changing the model itself. We're just asking the model to predict whether there is ink in that region or no ink. That is the crux of all of this. So how did this work? Well, so here are some of the test results we got. And this is, again, it's a very normal way to see how well a model is performing. And so you basically hide some parts of your data from the machine, so you only use part of your data for training. And the other side is the validation data, so you use it to test if the model is really performing well. So in this case, job 0, obviously it was trained on the bottom half. And for job 1, it was trained on the top half. Then for each case, once model was done, we kind of froze the model. And then we gave the top half those subvolumes and said, okay, now predict where the ink might be. And that is the result. Now you might say, well, compared to the ground truth, which is basically to the right, the prediction sections are not yet clear. It's true. This is not magic. We're not claiming anything is magic, anything is easy. But at the same time, you can see some traces of letters. That means it's not just randomly guessing where the ink may be. So it's doing something. It's definitely seeing something that we as humans are unable to see, but it is capturing something in those subvolumes, some kind of difference. And here's another example. In this case, this one fragment was divided into 16 sections. So we would train on 15 of them but hide one section. And then this is a composite picture. So if the pink was the validation part, then we would train on everything but the pink and then validate on the pink part. Again, it's, we cannot see it as clearly as the labeled image, but it is starting to detect something. Now, all of this, I'm making it sound like the machine just improves on its own by just, all we have to do is to give input data and output data, and machine does everything for you. It doesn't work like that. Because if that were the case, we'll all not have any jobs. So here are some of the things. This is probably more for the technical audience. We tried a lot of things for the model itself. We tried, this is just a relatively small list, but number of layers and sizes. We definitely tried more layers, didn't necessarily improve. Pooling methods, loss function, dropout rate, no dropout, learning rate definitely was pretty crucial, I would say. Batch size, we even tried some other architectures like UNet. Each of these things contributed to a slight improvement in performance, but interestingly, not in a huge, drastic way. So that was the model. And then also, we looked at the input data. And we tried stratified sampling, this, that. But one rather basic thing we tried, because we were kind of curious, was the shape of the input data. And we started out with a cubic shape, just because that seemed like a good default place to start. And that was okay. But then we started experimenting with more like column shapes. So you would capture deeper, I guess, more things that are deeper into the layer of that papyrus sheet. And we also tried a tile-like shape where it's shallower but bigger. And interestingly, this actually made a pretty big difference. For some reason, once we started using the tile shape, we never went back to the cube. And I'm not going to say why, and I'm going to save that question for for about 5 minutes, and I'll get to that. Not that I know why, but because this is an important point in some ways. So how much improvement did it make? Well, this does not look like a huge improvement, but for us, it was a huge improvement. So this is a lab-created example where there is a papyrus sheet, and we use the same kind of ink and artificially created, that sample right there. So the ground truth is on the top right-hand corner, and but in this particular case, the ink is not layered so many times, so it's a pretty thin layer of ink, a relatively small amount of ink. So our model had a hard time detecting that, specifically that column where the quantity of ink was limited. So what we started out is obviously on the left, and an arrow to the right. So you can see that what used to be very, very barely detectable became more detectable just by changing the input shape. So this is the kind of thing that we kept trying different ways of running these machine learning algorithms. And in 2022. This is quite symbolic, I think, even though I totally get it. It's not English, so it's not high. But at the same time, I thought it was just kind of fitting that the first hidden layer, so this is a layer beneath what you can see on the surface, we were able to apply that machine learning model by by training on the surface what we can see, and then give that model the next layer, the hidden layer, and basically the model predicted where the ink should be, and this is what was revealed, and this was 2022. And again, now we are standing here, we're seeing columns and columns of text, so you may say, 2 letters, okay, but it was definitely the beginning of something very big. So first non-invasive discovery of hidden Herculaneum text. Now, let me just say a little bit about this whole machine learning as a kind of a black box, what that means, and what in some ways bothers us and also excites us. So remember, I said when I was explaining that whole machine learning pipeline, just put a bunch of polynomial equations or something, just put it in there, and then let the machine figure out how to revise it in such a way that you're able to obtain the kind of expected results, what you need. Well, that part is, in all of AI, all of machine learning, it is kind of like a black box to all of us. But black box is never fun. We always want to know why. And there was a paper in 2019, and this is a very basic example, but when machine learning models were able to distinguish dog versus a cat, or being able to say, that's a truck, not an airplane, kind of thing. A lot of researchers wanted to know how the machine was actually doing it. And there was a paper that introduced this software called GradCam. And this example right there, the waterfall, yes, so the machine figured out it was waterfall. Well, what was it really focusing on? And they were able to show, yes, it's first the computer was scanning the entire image, but pretty soon it started to focus on that section of the image, which is right. I mean, we as humans, that is what we see when, if we look at that picture. So it is focusing, and specifically that section of the waterfall. And that was the reason that computer decided that is a picture of a waterfall. And the elephants on the right side, I think this was African versus Asian elephant. So how was the computer, what was computer seeing, focused on? And they discovered those sections that's brightly lit was what the machine was focused on. Now, you might say, how do you know this? Well, there are ways to do this mathematically. I'm not going to get into it here. So we applied something similar to our 3D model to see if we could get anything out of it. We basically wanted to ask, what are you seeing? Because we're not seeing that. Well, this is where we kind of got very confused, because it was just kind of seeing everything. And it went everywhere. I ran this so many times, and in both cases where there was ink or no ink, it was very diffuse. And this is something we are still, we're planning on going back to, because now especially the model is doing even much better than it was 2 years ago. Maybe it will give us some insight as to what the model is seeing. Maybe seeing is not the right word, but to me it's seeing, and what is it ignoring as well. Similarly, as I said, it's a bunch of polynomial equations. So as it goes through that model, is the focus even changing? And again, with a cat frame, it's kind of easy. 2D images are much easier. So you can see what the computer is focused on, each layer. So first it's focusing on details, those brightly lit areas of that kitten, transforming. Then later on, kind of an overall shape. Is that what happened? Well, not necessarily with 3D. It was just kind of oscillating. So again, this is still an ongoing question that we would like to continue. Okay, now with the last just 2 minutes, I want to add that all of this research takes so much data, and as Federico was talking about this morning, even just for one fragment, you end up with so many images of 2D, 3D, and there are lots of us, who do different things, papyrologists, computer scientists, archaeologists. We all need different data, and we all have so much data, so much information that have to be attached to all of this stuff that we do. Input data, output data. And so far, we've been doing kind of like Excel spreadsheet, relational database, and that was getting to a point where it was so messy, and it was just kind of going everywhere. And it was very difficult to find something we were looking for. So we over the summer, we started this process of taking all of those things in and gradually merging them into something called a graph database, where we can say, given a fragment, give me all the konichi that belong to it, and for each one, give me all the images that are associated, and where those images are kept, who's responsible, maybe even the website for that institution that's holding the fragment, and so on. This is still work in progress, so we'll be, I'm using something called Neo4j to implement this, so I'll be working with, a lot of people. We'll be doing this probably over the course of this year. So that's just to show you how much work it takes to put all of this magic machine learning happen. The data is everywhere, and managing and organizing data itself is also a challenge. Now, I want to mention that obviously I'm representing the University of Kentucky group, but the person who should get all this credit for probably most of today's talk is Stephen Parsons, who's not here. So I presented a lot of his work on behalf of him. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mami. I think we have time for some questions if you want to stay up.
Yep.
Yes.
I just want to follow up question on the graph database. Are you using the graph database mostly to manage the metadata about where the data resides?
Am I using what? Sorry.
The graph database to manage the metadata about where the data resides?
Yes, that is what we are trying to do right now. We're in a transition phase. We're gathering information and trying to figure out on the graph database how it should be, handled. But our goal ultimately is to have every single piece of information that's attached to all of this somehow organized on that graph database. Anything else?
So why did you end up using tiles?
Trial and error. We did columns. We did larger cubes, smaller cubes, and then also there is something called intuition when you're doing research. I think any kind of research. So when you start seeing some promising signs, it kind of guides you toward that direction. So I think it was a combination of luck, intuition, and just sheer amount of trial and error.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mami.